What do you know about Kissinger? From birth to the day of his departure. Part 1. Henry Kissinger, architect of diplomacy or controversial figure. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to and today we have a fascinating topic to explore: Henry Kissinger. Often hailed as a mastermind of diplomacy, Kissinger's legacy is also shrouded in controversy. Before we dive into the details, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated with our content. Now, let's get started. Born in 1923 in Germany, Henry Kissinger fled the Nazis with his family and eventually settled in the United States. He went on to become a key figure in American politics, serving as National Security Advisor and later as Secretary of State under Presidents Nixon and Ford. Kissinger is often praised for his role in normalizing relations between the United States and China in the early 1970s, a historic moment in international diplomacy known as the Opening of China. His efforts also contributed to the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, effectively ending U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Kissinger was a proponent of realpolitik, a pragmatic approach to foreign policy based on practical rather than ideological considerations. This approach led to some controversial decisions, such as supporting authoritarian regimes in the interest of geopolitical stability during the Cold War. However, Kissinger's legacy is far from universally positive. His involvement in covert operations, such as the secret bombing of Cambodia during the Vietnam War and allegations of supporting human rights abuses in countries like Chile, have sparked intense criticism and debate. In a surprising turn of events, Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 for his role in the Vietnam War negotiations. This decision, too, fueled controversy. Today, opinions on Kissinger's legacy remain divided, with some seeing him as a brilliant strategist and others as a symbol of morally questionable decisions. So, was Henry Kissinger an architect of diplomacy, a master strategist navigating the complexities of the Cold War, or a controversial figure whose actions raised ethical concerns? The answer is likely a mix of both. As always, history is nuanced, and understanding the full picture is crucial. Kissinger's family emigrated to the United States in 1938 to escape the Nazi persecution of Jews. He became a naturalized citizen in 1943. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II and in the post-war U.S. military government of Germany. After leaving the service, he entered Harvard University, where he received a BA. He opposed Secretary of State John Foster Dulles' policy of planning a nuclear massive retaliation to Soviet attack, advocating instead a flexible response combining the use of tactical nuclear weapons and conventional forces, as well as the development of weapons technology in accordance with strategic requirements. Henry Alfred Kissinger, born May 27, 1923, November 29, 2023, was an American diplomat, political scientist, geopolitical consultant, and politician who served as United States Secretary of State and National Security Advisor in the presidential administrations of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford between 1969 and 1977. Born in Germany, Kissinger came to the United States in 1938 as a Jewish refugee from Nazi persecution. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, and after the war was educated at Harvard University, where he became a professor of government and earned an international reputation as an expert on nuclear weapons and foreign policy. He frequently acted as a consultant to government agencies, think tanks, and the presidential campaigns of Nelson Rockefeller and Nixon before being appointed National Security Advisor. Kissinger pioneered the policy of détente with the Soviet Union, orchestrated the Sino-Soviet split and an opening of relations with China, engaged in shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East to end the Yom Kippur War, and negotiated the Paris Peace Accords, which ended American involvement in the Vietnam War. For the latter, he was awarded the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize under controversial circumstances. After leaving government, Kissinger founded Kissinger Associates, an international geopolitical consulting firm. He authored over a dozen books on diplomatic history and international relations. Kissinger's legacy is a polarizing subject in American politics. He is considered by many scholars as an ultra-realist who successfully reshaped foreign policy in American interests, prevented nuclear proliferation, as well as a conflict between the United States and Soviet Union. He is therefore often ranked as one of the most effective secretaries of state in American history. However, he was also widely denounced as having abandoned American values due to his adherence to realpolitik, which included overlooking human rights violations by allies, including those involved in war crimes, if it was judged to be geopolitically advantageous. Kissinger was born Heinz Alfred Kissinger on May 27, 1923, in Fürth, Bavaria, Germany. Kissinger's family was German-Jewish, his great-great-grandfather Meyer Laub having adopted Kissinger as his surname in 1817, taking it from the Bavarian spa town of Bad Kissingen. In his childhood, Kissinger enjoyed playing soccer, He played for the youth team of SPVGG Firth, which was one of the nation's best clubs at the time. In a 2022 BBC interview, Kissinger vividly recalled being 9 years old in 1933 and learning of Adolf Hitler's election as Chancellor of Germany, which proved to be a profound turning point for the Kissinger family. During Nazi rule, Kissinger and his friends were regularly harassed and beaten by Hitler youth gangs. Kissinger sometimes defied the segregation imposed by Nazi racial laws by sneaking into soccer stadiums to watch matches, often resulting in beatings from security guards. As results of the Nazis' anti-Semitic laws, Kissinger was unable to gain admittance to the gymnasium and his father was dismissed from his teaching job. On August 20, 1938, when Kissinger was 15 years old, he and his family fled Germany to avoid further Nazi persecution. Kissinger spent his high school years in the German Jewish community in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan. Although Kissinger assimilated quickly into American culture, he never lost his pronounced German accent due to childhood shyness that made him hesitant to speak. After his first year at George Washington High School, he began attending school at night while working in a shaving brush factory during the day. Following high school, Kissinger studied accounting at the City College of New York, excelling academically as a part-time student while continuing to work. His studies were interrupted in early 1943, when he was drafted into the U.S. Army. Kissinger underwent basic training at Camp Croft in Spartanburg, South Carolina, on June 19, 1943. At the age of 20, while stationed in South Carolina, he became a naturalized U.S. citizen. The Army sent him to study engineering at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania under the Army Specialized Training Program. But the program was canceled and Kissinger was reassigned to the 84th Infantry Division. There, he made the acquaintance of Fritz Kremer, a fellow immigrant from Germany who noted Kissinger's fluency in German and his intellect and arranged for him to be assigned to the division's military intelligence. Kissinger saw combat with the division and volunteered for hazardous intelligence duties during the Battle of the Bulge. On April 10, 1945, he participated in the liberation of the Hanover-Ulm concentration camp, a subcamp of the Neuengamme concentration camp. At the time, Kissinger wrote in his journal, "I had never seen people degraded to the level that people were in Ulm. They barely looked human. They were skeletons." After the initial shock, however, Kissinger was relatively silent about his wartime service. During the American advance into Germany, Kissinger, though only a private, the lowest military rank, was put in charge of the administration of the city of Krefeld because of a lack of German speakers on the division's intelligence staff. Within 8 days he had established a civilian administration. Kissinger was then reassigned to the Counterintelligence Corps CIC, where he became a CIC special agent holding the enlisted rank of sergeant. He was given charge of a team in Hanover assigned to tracking down Gestapo officers and other saboteurs, for which he was awarded the Bronze Star. Kissinger drew up a comprehensive list of all known Gestapo employees in the Bergstrasse region and had them rounded up. By the end of July, 12 men had been arrested. In March 1947, Fritz Gerke, Hans Hellenbroich, Michael Roth, and Karl Statman were subsequently caught and tried by the Dachau Military Tribunal for killing 2 American prisoners of war. In June 1945, Kissinger was made commandant of the Bensheim Metro CIC detachment, Bergstrasse district of Hesse, with responsibility for denazification of the district, although he possessed absolute authority and powers of arrest. Kissinger took care to avoid abuses against the local population by his command. In 1946, Kissinger was reassigned to teach at the European Command Intelligence School at Camp King. As a civilian employee following his separation from the Army, continued to serve in this role. Kissinger recalled that his experience in the Army made me feel like an American. Kissinger earned his Bachelor of Arts summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa in Political Science from Harvard College in 1950, where he lived in Adams House and studied under William Yandell Elliott. His senior undergraduate thesis, titled The Meaning of History, Reflections on Spengler, Toynbee and Kant, was over 400 pages long and was the origin of the current limit on length 35,000 words. He earned his Master of Arts and Doctor of Philosophy at Harvard University in 1951 and 1954, respectively. In 1952, while still a graduate student at Harvard, he served as a consultant to the director of the Psychological Strategy Board and founded a magazine, Confluence. At that time, he sought to work as a spy for the FBI. Kissinger's doctoral dissertation was titled Peace, Legitimacy, and the Equilibrium, a study of the statesmanship of Castlereagh and Metternich. Stephen Grobard, Kissinger's friend, asserted that Kissinger primarily pursued such endeavor to instruct himself on the history of power play between European states in the 19th century. In his doctoral dissertation, Kissinger first introduced the concept of legitimacy, which he defined as, legitimacy as used here should not be confused with justice. It means no more than an international agreement about the nature of workable arrangements and about the permissible aims and methods of foreign policy. An international order accepted by all of the major powers is legitimate, whereas an international order not accepted by one or more of the great powers is revolutionary and hence dangerous. Thus, when after the Congress of Vienna in 1815, the leaders of Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia agreed to cooperate in the concert of Europe to preserve the peace after Austria, Prussia, and Russia participated in a series. Kissinger remained at Harvard as a member of the faculty in the Department of Government, where he served as the director of the Harvard International Seminar between 1951 and 1971. In 1955, he was a consultant to the National Security Council's Operations Coordinating Board. During 1955 and 1956, he was also study director in nuclear weapons and foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. He released his book Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy the following year. The book, which criticized the Eisenhower administration's massive retaliation nuclear doctrine, caused much controversy at the time by proposing the use of tactical nuclear weapons on a regular basis to win wars. That same year, he published A World Restored, a study of balance of power politics in post-Napoleonic Europe, from 1956 to 1958. Kissinger worked for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund as director of its Special Studies Project. He served as the director of the Harvard Defense Studies Program between 1958 and 1971. In 1958, he also co-founded the Center for International Affairs with Robert R. Bowie, where he served as its associate director. Outside of academia, he served as a consultant to several government agencies and think tanks, including the Operations Research Office, the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, Department of State, and the RAND Corporation. Keen to have a greater influence on U.S. foreign policy, Kissinger became foreign policy advisor to the presidential campaigns of Nelson Rockefeller, supporting his bids for the Republican nomination in 1960, 1964, and 1968. Kissinger first met Richard Nixon at a party hosted by Clare Boothe Luce in 1967, saying that he found him more thoughtful than he expected. During the Republican primaries in 1968, Kissinger again served as the foreign policy advisor to Rockefeller, and in July 1968 called Nixon the most dangerous of all the men running to have as president. Initially upset when Nixon won the Republican nomination, the ambitious Kissinger soon changed his mind about Nixon and contacted a Nixon campaign aide, Richard Allen, to state he was willing to do anything to help Nixon win. After Nixon became president in January 1969, Kissinger was appointed as National Security Advisor. By this time, he was arguably one of the most important theorists about foreign policy ever to be produced by the United States of America, according to his official biographer Niall Ferguson. Kissinger served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under President Richard Nixon and continued as Secretary of State under Nixon's successor Gerald Ford. With the death of George Shultz in February 2021, Kissinger was the last surviving member of the Nixon administration cabinet. The relationship between Nixon and Kissinger was unusually close, and has been compared to the relationships of Woodrow Wilson and Colonel House, or Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Hopkins. In all three cases, the State Department was relegated to a backseat role in developing foreign policy. Kissinger and Nixon shared a penchant for secrecy and conducted numerous back-channel negotiations, such as that through the Soviet ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Dobrynin, that excluded State Department experts. Historian David Rothkopf has looked at the personalities of Nixon and Kissinger, saying, "They were a fascinating pair. In a way, they complemented each other perfectly." Kissinger was the charming and worldly Mr. Outside who provided the grace and intellectual establishment respectability that Nixon lacked, disdained, and aspired to. Kissinger was an international citizen, Nixon very much a classic American. Kissinger had a worldview and a facility for adjusting it to meet the times. Nixon had pragmatism and a strategic vision that provided the foundations for their policies. Kissinger would, of course, say that he was not political like Nixon. But in fact he was just as political as Nixon, just as calculating, just as relentlessly ambitious. These self-made men were driven as much by their need for approval and their neuroses as by their strengths. A proponent of realpolitik, Kissinger played a dominant role in United States foreign policy between 1969 and 1977. In that period, he extended the policy of détente. This policy led to a significant relaxation in U.S. Soviet tensions and played a crucial role in 1971 talks with People's Republic of China Premier Zhou Enlai. The talks concluded with a rapprochement between the United States and the People's Republic of China, and the formation of a new strategic anti-Soviet Sino-American alignment. He was jointly awarded the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize with Le Duc Tho for helping to establish a ceasefire and U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. The ceasefire, however, was not durable. Though declined to accept the award and Kissinger appeared deeply ambivalent about it, He donated his prize money to charity, did not attend the awards ceremony, and later offered to return his prize medal. As National Security Advisor in 1974, Kissinger directed the much-debated National Security Study Memorandum 200, Détente and Opening to China. See also, on China. Kissinger initially had little interest in China when he began his work as National Security Advisor in 1969, and the driving force behind the rapprochement with China was Nixon. In April 1970, both Nixon and Kissinger promised Chiang Ching-kuo, the son of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, that they would never abandon Taiwan or make any compromises with Mao Zedong. Although Nixon did speak vaguely of his wish to improve relations with the People's Republic, Kissinger made 2 trips to China in July and October 1971, the first of which was made in secret to confer with Premier Zhou Enlai, then in charge of Chinese foreign policy. During his visit to Beijing, the main issue turned out to be Taiwan, as Zhou demanded the United States recognize that Taiwan was a legitimate part of China, pull U.S. forces out of Taiwan, and end military support for the Kuomintang regime. Kissinger gave way by promising to pull U.S. forces out of Taiwan, saying 2/3 would be pulled out when the Vietnam War ended and the rest to be pulled out as Sino-American relations improved. In October 1971, as Kissinger was making his second trip to the People's Republic, the issue of which Chinese government deserved to be represented in the United Nations came up again. Out of concern to not be seen abandoning an ally, the United States tried to promote a compromise under which both Chinese regimes would be unmembers, although Kissinger called it an essentially doomed rearguard action. While American ambassador to the UN George H.W. Bush was lobbying for the two China's formula, Kissinger was removing favorable references to Taiwan from a speech that Rogers was preparing, as he expected the country to be expelled from the UN. During his second visit to Beijing, Kissinger told Zhou that according to a public opinion poll, 62% of Americans wanted Taiwan to remain an unmember and asked him to consider the two China's compromise to avoid offending American public opinion. Zhou responded with his claim that the People's Republic was the legitimate government of all China, and no compromise was possible with the Taiwan issue. Kissinger said that the United States could not totally sever ties with Chiang, who had been an ally in World War II. Kissinger told Nixon that Bush was too soft and not sophisticated enough to properly represent the United States at the UN, and expressed no anger when the UN General Assembly voted to expel Taiwan and give China's seat on the UN Security Council to the People's Republic. The result was the formation of a tacit strategic anti-Soviet alliance between China and the United States. Kissinger's diplomacy led to economic and cultural exchanges between the two sides and the establishment of liaison offices in the Chinese and American capitals, though full normalization of relations with China would not occur until 1979. Nixon supported Pakistani dictator General Yahya Khan in the Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971. Kissinger sneered at people who bleed for the dying Bengalis and ignored the first telegram from the United States Consul General in East Pakistan, Archer K. Blood, and 20 members of his staff, which informed the U.S. that their allies West Pakistan were undertaking, in Blood's words, a selective genocide targeting the Bengali intelligentsia, supporters of independence for East Pakistan, and the Hindu minority. In the second, more famous, Blood telegram, the word genocide was again used to describe the events, and further that with its continuing support for West Pakistan, the U.S. government had evidenced moral bankruptcy. As a direct response to the dissent against U.S. policy, Kissinger and Nixon ended Archer Blood's tenure as United States Consul General in East Pakistan and put him to work in the State Department's Personnel Office. Christopher Clarey argues that Nixon and Kissinger were unconsciously biased, leading them to overestimate the likelihood of Pakistani victory against Bengali rebels. Kissinger was particularly concerned about the expansion of Soviet influence in the Indian subcontinent as a result of a treaty of friendship recently signed by India and the USSR, and sought to demonstrate to the People's Republic of China, Pakistan's ally and an enemy of both India and the USSR, the value of a tacit alliance with the United States. Kissinger had also come under fire for private comments he made to Nixon during the Bangladesh-Pakistan War, in which he described Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi as a bitch and a witch. He also said the Indians are bastards shortly before the war. Kissinger later expressed his regret over the comments. According to notes taken by H.R. Haldeman, Nixon ordered his aides to exclude all Jewish Americans from policy making on Israel, including Kissinger. One note quotes Nixon as saying, "Get K. Kissinger out of the play. Haig, handle it." In 1973, Kissinger did not feel that pressing the Soviet Union concerning the plight of Jews being persecuted there was in the interest of U.S. foreign policy. In conversation with Nixon shortly after a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir on March 1, 1973, Kissinger stated, "The emigration of Jews from the Soviet Union is not an objective of American foreign policy. And if they put Jews into gas chambers in the Soviet Union, it is not an American concern. They be a humanitarian concern. He had a negative view of American Jews who lobbied for aid to Soviet Jews, calling them bastards and self-serving. He went on to state that if it were not for the accident of my birth, I would be anti-Semitic, and any people who has been persecuted for 2,000 years must be doing something wrong. In September 1973, Nixon fired Rogers as Secretary of State and replaced him with Kissinger. He would later state he had not been given enough time to know the Middle East as he settled into the State Department. Kissinger later admitted that he was so engrossed with the Paris peace talks to end the Vietnam War that he and others in Washington missed the significance of the Egyptian-Saudi alliance. Sadat expelled Soviet advisors from Egypt in May 1972, attempting to signal to the U.S. that he was open to disentangling Egypt from the Soviet sphere of influence. Kissinger in turn offered secret talks on a settlement for the Middle East, though nothing came of the offer. By March 1973, Sadat had moved back towards the Soviets, closing the largest arms package between Egypt and the USSR and allowing for the return of Soviet military personnel and advisors to Egypt. Kissinger delayed telling President Richard Nixon about the start of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 in order to keep him from interfering in the nascent conflict. On October 6, 1973, the Israelis informed Kissinger about the attack at 6 a.m. Kissinger waited nearly 3+ hours before he informed Nixon. According to Kissinger, he was notified at 6:30 a.m. 12:30 p.m. Israel time that war was imminent, and his urgent calls to the Soviets and Egyptians were ineffective. On October 12, under Nixon's direction, and against Kissinger's initial advice, while Kissinger was on his way to Moscow to discuss conditions for a ceasefire, Nixon sent a message to Brezhnev giving Kissinger full negotiating authority. Kissinger wanted to stall a ceasefire to gain more time for Israel to push across the Suez Canal to the African side, and wanted to be perceived as a mere presidential emissary who needed to consult the White House all the time as a stalling tactic. Kissinger promised the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir that the United States would replace its losses in equipment after the war, but sought initially to delay arms shipments to Israel, as he believed it would improve the odds of making peace along the lines of United Nations Security Council Resolution 242. In 1973, Meir requested $850 million worth of American arms and equipment to replace its material losses. Nixon instead sent some $2 billion worth. The arms lift enraged King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, and he retaliated on October 20, 1973, by placing a total embargo on oil shipments to the United States, to be joined by all of the other oil-producing Arab states except Iraq and Libya. On November 7, 1973, Kissinger flew to Riyadh to meet King Faisal and to ask him to end the oil embargo in exchange for promising to be even-handed in the Arab-Israeli dispute. Despite all of Kissinger's efforts to charm him, Faisal refused to lift the oil embargo. Only on March 19, 1974, did the king end the oil embargo, after Sadat reported to him that the United States was being more even-handed, and after Kissinger had promised to sell Saudi Arabia weapons that it had previously denied under the grounds that they might be used against Israel. Kissinger pressured the Israelis to cede some of the newly captured land back to its Arab neighbors, contributing to the first phases of Israeli-Egyptian non-aggression. In 1973,197 for Kissinger engaged in shuttle diplomacy flying between Tel Aviv, Cairo, and Damascus in a bid to make the armistice the basis of a permanent peace. Kissinger's first meeting with Hafez al-Assad lasted 6 hours and 30 minutes, causing the press to believe for a moment that he had been kidnapped by the Syrian. In his memoirs, Kissinger described how, during the course of his 28 meetings in Damascus in 1973-74, Assad negotiated tenaciously and daringly like a riverboat gambler to make sure he had exacted the last sliver of available concessions. As for the others Kissinger negotiated with, Kissinger viewed the Israeli politicians as rigid, while he had a good relationship and was able to develop a sense of assurance with Sadat. Kissinger's efforts resulted in 2 ceasefires between Egypt and Israel, Sinai I in January 1974 and Sinai II in September 1975. Kissinger had avoided involving France and the United Kingdom, the former European colonial powers of the Middle East, in the peace negotiations that followed the Yom Kippur, being primarily focused on minimizing the Soviet Union's sway over the peace negotiations and on moderating the international influences on the Arab-Israeli conflict. President Pompidou of France was concerned and perturbed by this development, viewing it as an indication of the United States' ambitions of hegemonically domineering the region. I stop at this point today. Soon we will publish Part 2. Thank you for watching. I hope I added something to you. You enjoyed the last few minutes. We will meet with you soon.